that we'd never be apart.
Radio has been an important source of news and entertainment ever since it first came into people's homes in the 1920s. But radio has changed a lot since the days of our parents and grandparents. The television has long since pushed the radio out of pride of place in the lounge room, and it's found a new home in the kitchen, car and workplace. In fact, today's radios, because of their low cost and portability, can be constantly in the background of our daily lives. The process of getting information onto the radio is in a lot of ways far more simple than producing a newspaper or a television program. And because of this, radio is still the fastest way of finding out what is happening around us. When it comes to news, don't forget the radio. That's where you'll hear it first. In Australia, the largest radio network is the ABC, or Australian Broadcasting Corporation. In Melbourne, the ABC's news department is hidden inside a large commercial building in the heart of the city. The newsroom looks a bit like its newspaper and TV counterparts, because these days the main tool of any kind of journalist is the computer terminal. One of the senior journalists here is Prahran West. Her first assignment of the day is to cover a nearby press conference organised by the Prices Surveillance Authority. It's about an inquiry into computer software prices in Australia. It doesn't look like being a particularly important news story, but at this stage there isn't a lot else happening. This is the reason that there is such an impressive media lineup at the press conference, with all the daily newspapers, television and major radio stations on deck. Centre of attention is Professor Alan Fells, the chairman of the authority.
The key issue is whether Australians are paying too much for computer software or whether the prices are fair and reasonable. At this stage, there seems to be
the challenge for all the media people is to fit together a story for their various deadlines. The newspaper reporters can, if necessary, file their reports as late as 9 or 10 in the evening to make the next day's morning newspaper. The television crews have their nightly news programs with quite a lot of production work to do beforehand. But for Prahran, the next hourly ABC news broadcast is in 10 minutes.
Hi, it's Prahran. Computer costs. The Prices Surveillance Authority wants to find out why Australians are paying 33% more for their computer software.
The story that Prahran has dictated by phone is sub-edited and only minutes later has its place on the bulletin read by ABC newsreader Mary Adams.
The Prices Surveillance Authority wants to find out why Australians are paying 33% more for their computer software than their US counterparts. The Melbourne hearings of the PSA inquiry into software pricing started today, and Professor Fells says there's widespread disagreement about comparative costs. A recent survey by the PSA found on average software packages were 70.
In order to provide a different story for later bulletins, Prahran's next move is to try to find a different angle on the story by interviewing one of the people making a submission to the inquiry.
We have the people probably paying 70% too much, and that's causing a lot of undesirable consequences.
How could that be reduced?
It could be reduced by the government taking action to ensure that distributors charged
Back in the newsroom, Prahran prepares a new version of the report, and this time includes a section of tape she has recorded at the press conference.
And I can't be sure the explanation is that there are people making vast quantities because they have...
An interesting thing to note here is that radio reporters are often involved in more hands-on technical work than TV and newspaper journalists. Here, Prahran is transferring a section of her tape to a special tape cartridge known by radio people as a cart. This will be used by Mary Adams in the next news bulletin.
At 33%. Professor Phil says the inquiry wants to establish if Australians are paying far more than they need.
Services are provided free at the moment or at very low cost without charge, but they're paid for out of the higher price. Now, could you unbundle the two, and if people want service, they pay for it separately?
News reading itself is a specialised skill, especially when it comes to timing.
Oh, it's vital. Absolutely vital, particularly now that the ABC being the largest networking system within Australia. We rely on the satellite, or Spock as we call it. Now, if I don't finish the bulletin 1 second to the top of the clock, as we'll call it, the computer just says, goodbye, Mary, that's it. And finally, let's check Melbourne's weather for today. Well, fine and mild, as we know, with cloud increasing and some northerly winds freshening. Rain at times tomorrow, and fresh northerlies turning westerly in the evening. Tomorrow is expected to top about 18 degrees, and in the city it's 23 at the moment. And just repeating conflicting signs about Australia's labour market. ABC News.
Although radio news is all about spoken words, you might have noticed that most of these words are written before they are spoken.
The key thing about the writing style for radio is brevity. Basically, one par is one idea. The style that we have in our written scripts is, I mean, I'm starting to write a story now. I'll write it in one paragraph sentences, and then it's separated by a gap, so that the newsreader, when presented with the script, looks at it and sees sort of a clear thing of, say, 4 or 5 paragraphs, which are one sentence each, contain one idea that can be quickly understood. You've always got to remember, when you are writing for radio, it's writing for the ear of people. You know, it's up the stick and it's gone. I mean, it really is a case of sort of what you hear is what you get. So you have to get it the first time, because you can't go back as with newspaper and reread the bits that didn't quite make sense until it comes to you. You've got to get it first time.
The ABC is a government-funded broadcaster with a national network of journalists to draw news from. But some of the commercial stations vie for the same audience. And in Melbourne, 3AW takes pride in competing with the ABC as the main news radio station. David Armstrong is the morning news editor.
It is basically news all the time. We've changed the mentality. There aren't really any soft programs across the day. Breakfast is news-oriented. You'll probably find most of the things in your paper. If you read about them, you'll hear them talking about them on 3AW. The Neil Mitchell program of a morning generates its own news stories, but right across the day, it only really eases off late at night, about 10 o'clock through to about 4 o'clock in the morning. And the newsroom, the 12 people in here, play an integral role in that. They're the major news contributors. We're the ones out on the streets getting the news.
By comparison to the ABC, 3AW's news operation relies on the news journalists taking on all the various roles in the news area, including sub-editing, audio editing, and news reading. It's just David, the news editor, and the handful of journalists working fast and furious.
We have to sell advertising on air to make money. We feel a lot more ruthless and a lot less bureaucratic than the ABC. We're of the opinion that the ABC is slow to react. Here, it's very, very ruthless. We just always try to beat the ABC. That's our #1 creed here, is just beat the ABC. They're the only credible opposition in town, and so we must, beat the ABC at all possible occasions. We don't want to sacrifice accuracy, and we don't want to sacrifice brevity and making it a good story, but it's imperative that we get it on first here, and that we get it right.
If it's detailed on-the-spot news that you're after, then stations like the ABC or 3AW are the specialists. But if you're one of the younger set, then chances are you're more likely to stay tuned to a more switched-on music station like Fox FM.
Fox FM, and then he dropped his blundle.
Oh, please.
Good morning to Peter Harrison, too. James Moran and James Blundell with Way Out West, and also Brian Adams, the summer of '69.
On a station like Fox, the emphasis is more on entertainment and less on information. There is a regular news bulletin, but the station doesn't send out its own journalists to gather news. However, according to station general manager Simon Rufus, news still plays an important role on this kind of station.
News is extremely important. Listeners want information, and the way that they treat the news on radio is more give us the headlines, more so than really get into the in-depth part of the story. They'll actually seek that from TV news at night. What they want out of the day when they're listening to the radio is just keep us up to date. Let us know what's going on, give us the headlines.
On Fox FM, an interesting treatment of comment on current affairs is the use of comedy. The Fox Breakfast program uses a team of comedy writers and presenters who you might recognise from television's Fast Forward program. They produce short, on-air segments loosely based on current affairs and issues.
To their side. Matty, what do you got?
I'm afraid he's not here. He's asked me to do it. It's Pick from Pretoria.
Oh, I'm sorry, Pick. How are you?
Yes, he's out the back and he's asked me to read this little story.
Didn't know that.
In South Africa, 2 members of the white supremacist party, the ANC, decided to play a bit of a practical joke on one of their members. After knocking him out with sleeping tablets, they fuzzed up his hair and made him look like a blick. When he woke up, the man stumbled into the bathroom, looked into the mirror, and picked up a horsewhip and flogged himself to death.
Did he? Thank you, Pick.
This comedy material is produced by brainstorming ideas and then rapid development of short scripts.
I think writing this sort of broad comedy it's the best way to do it, because you spark off one another and you laugh. And actually I've almost forgotten how to write by myself since I started off being very protective about my scripts with Fast Forward when I first started working there, and now I just mix in. Everyone does, you know. Most of it is done on the run, which is good in a way. It's a sense of spontaneity and enjoyment and things. And in actual fact, I think that is the key to good sketch comedy. In the end, it comes down to people enjoying what they do, and the audience picks that up. It's not really a very complicated process. It's a bunch of people goofing off, you know, really, in a sort of a structured way.
Right, okay, a Mother's Day, Clive, right?
Hello! Clive Pompous-Arse here, that's Pompous-Arse to you. There's been a lot of flannel at night.
You popped on Pompous, sorry, man.
I'll move back a bit. Right. You right?
Hello! Clive Pompous-Arse here, that's Pompous-Arse to you. There's been a lot of flannel at nighty and fluffy slipper talk lately about Mother's Day. What a load of old Oedipus! I maintained a close relationship with my mother.
But while using the comedy team can provide interesting radio, it can sometimes be tricky working out just what is good comedy and what is going too far in an attempt to win the audience.
Here we go. In London, a priest in a Catholic monastery was thought to be possessed by the devil. When he was observed by the Monsignor, Father Joseph Flanagan was found to be lewdly dancing in the vestry and grabbing an invisible object.
A fade out here might be appropriate because the material could certainly offend, and that isn't the aim of this program. In the media, the point at which comedy starts to offend is commonly called the edge.
Yeah, the edge is a difficult line. We are trying to, we've really tried to create a bit of an edge, a bit of a point of difference with the comedy, and you know, sometimes we do go over the edge. We've been called racist, sexist, everything-ist you can think of, and you know, but we also get thousands of letters every week and faxes saying, and calls saying how great it is. You know, it's a very fine line, and that ultimately is a decision that I've got to make as to how far we can go and how, you know, if we did go too far, to pull the guys back and say, look, you know, learn from this, that was too far, and you know. But we did try and make a point with some of our comedy and get people talking. And I think one of the ways you get people talking is maybe to push that edge.
Working out just what the audience will accept and what they want musically isn't just a matter of guesswork. Commercial broadcasters need to convince advertisers that they're reaching large audiences of the right age and profile.
We research on a daily basis, Monday to Friday, our listeners. We've got people that come in that jump on the phones on the afternoon through into the night, speaking to the right age group of people, the right demographic, the right sex, the right areas of Melbourne that we want to be in touch with. Daily we're knowing what they're about in terms of music, and this research, what they require in terms of music, and this research goes in the computer. From that computer spits out a sheet that can tell us, you know, when songs are burning with the audience, when they're getting sick of hearing it too much, when they're not hearing it enough, that sort of information. And so on a daily basis we know musically what's required. Other forms of research, we do perceptual studies also by phone technique to discover more lifestyle information, the sorts of things that are really hot issues with people at the moment that the radio station should be reflecting, down to what sort of prizes people want to win.
Yeah, and who sang that?
By Pat Benatar?
Yeah, close enough's good enough. Actually, you're absolutely correct, Nick.
Oh, great.
Mate, you've won a $100 shopping voucher from our dear friends Forest Hill Chase.
A very different kind of radio station is located in central Victoria. 3CCC's building once was a railway station. And it is one of over 100 public radio stations in Australia, organised by community groups and operated largely by volunteers.
Well, public radio was born out of the dissatisfaction by a lot of people with mainstream media, I guess. Mainstream media always seemed to be untouchable to the layperson. It was there to be listened to, but it certainly wasn't there to be participated in. The commercial stations and the ABC, chose the music that we listened to and chose the topics through the news and current affairs that we were to pay attention to. And there didn't seem to be any latitude there for people to have their own say in a public sense. So in the early 70s, public radio was born out of that dissatisfaction, I guess, and the need for a public voice, an independent voice that was owned and operated by the people, lay people like you and me.
3CCC features a wide range of programs including music, special interest, education, current affairs and news.
Bendigo University College will become part of La Trobe University. The College Council voted 17-8 late last night to accept La Trobe University's conditions.
Between 8:30 and 9 in the morning, Wally Teasdale and friends, in this case Pam Ahern, present local and national news. They read selected reports from newspapers and also occasionally add their own comments. Once a week, Pam Ahern also hosts a program called Top of the Morning, which features local current affairs.
My sort of introduction to public radio, I almost stumbled into it. I was listening to the radio actually one day out in my stables. I have the radio going virtually 24 hours a day. Being a little dial twiddler that I am, I fell across 3CCC, and it was actually a Saturday morning, and they have a Saturday morning show here called Dog's Breakfast, which is quite radical. And I thought this sounded quite interesting. I started listening, and then I listened to 3CCC a little bit more, and I thought, those guys presenting sound like just you and me, people in the street. So I just rang the station up, said, how do you get on air? They told me what to do. There was a training course going, so I signed up for that, came through that, and ended up, here I am.
The fact that people can broadcast on public radio without having a specially trained radio voice is seen as an important attraction by many people involved in the station.
That's one of the nice things about it, I think. It's a more personal medium. You listen to people on public broadcasting stations and they're the type of person that you would hear talking to you in your own lounge room at home. It's a much more personal sort of communication medium. The commercial stations have got this sort of hyped up voice, and most voices sound very similar. The only difference that you can hear sometimes is whether it's female or male. And I mean, that's fine. They're there to sell a format and they're there to sell advertising, and they have to do that to compete, to sell that advertising. The ABC have a more sort of cultured sort of tone to their voices, I guess. But public broadcasting, it's just lay people. It's people like you and it's people like me talking to other people out there in the community.
Finally, there is another kind of radio station in Australia, apart from those that we've looked at, which plays an important part in broadcasting news programs. Radio Australia reaches a remarkable 50 million regular listeners and yet has a relatively low profile in Australia. It is our national voice and broadcasts to countries in the Asia-Pacific region using long-distance shortwave transmissions.
Radio Australia, in simple terms, is Australia's voice to the world. Most countries of the world have some way of reaching the outside world with their message. And that can range from the very, what we'd think of as high-powered propaganda stuff of Radio Pyongyang in North Korea, telling us every day, every hour what glorious leader Kim Il-sung has done, and glorious leader Kim Il-sung has opened blast furnace number 3, and glorious leader Kim Il-sung has met the Mongolian people's delegation at the airport. Then there are other kinds of stations, like the BBC, like the Voice of America, like Radio Australia, which are necessary because a liberal, Western, pluralistic society like ours sends out lots of different messages to the world. Is it the businessmen you listen to? Is it the sports people you listen to? Is it the dissidents you listen to? Is it the government you listen to? Radio Australia sort of synthesises all those different messages coming from Australia and says, yes, there are lots of contradictory messages, but we're all part of the one country, and this is basically what we are about.
At Radio Australia, this message of what we are about is broadcast in a number of different languages, including Chinese, French, Thai, Tok Pidgin, Vietnamese, and Indonesian.
Prakarsa Perdamaian Timur Tengah telah menyatakan tekad akan meneruskan pembicaraan dengan Israel. Beribu-ribu calon jemaah haji dari Iran kabarnya telah melancarkan rapat umum anti-Amerika Serikat di kota.
And even the English broadcasts here are a bit different to the style of news we usually hear in Australia.
Fiji says it's discussing the resumption of military aid from Australia and New Zealand. The Foreign Minister, Philippe Boel, told Parliament that discussions with Australia had centred on the need for security and intelligence contacts to be restored on an informal basis.
The nature of the medium and the nature of the audience both affect the way we go about what we do. A shortwave signal, even though it is an effective way of getting over long distances, is subject to all kinds of atmospheric interference. The time of day can affect it. It travels better at night than in daytime. Sunspots and the sunspot cycle affects it. In other words, anything to do with the Earth's magnetic field being upset, thunderstorms can upset it. So it's quite possible that a listener at the other end does have to search around a bit through a lot of surge and hiss and crackle and pop to get that signal. Partly for that reason, partly because in English, most of Radio Australia's listeners are listening in their second language or perhaps their third language. Therefore, we speak much more slowly on Radio Australia. And listeners to Radio Australia who are used to even a domestic ABC delivery, let alone a commercial Australian rapid-fire delivery, will find Radio Australia painfully slow. It's not because we're slow and dull, it's because we want to ensure that anything lost through that surge and hiss and crackle and pop on the shortwave frequencies is minimised. In other words, a person may lose a word, but never a whole sentence.
Apart from problems of language and the technicalities of broadcasting to other countries, there is also the need to be aware of the different sensitivities of other cultures.
An example I can think of was when our current affairs area produced a documentary about the Thai monarchy. Now, this was for broadcast in English, it was for broadcast in all Radio Australia languages. And it was very interesting. It's a fascinating institution. They're sort of semi-divine, one of the few last remaining monarchies. But the Thais came to us and said, look, this is great, this is good, we've got no objection to this. But if we broadcast this to Thailand in Thai, we're going to be gratuitously offensive to every Thai listener. You simply cannot talk about the Thai monarchy in these terms in Thai. Do it in English, that's terrific. Do it in Indonesian, do it in Japanese, but don't do it in Thai. We had a look at that and thought, yeah, that's legitimate. So we withdrew that program for them and replaced it. A couple of weeks later, there was another current affairs program about issues involving child slavery. And there were many examples drawn from around the world, from South and Central America, from the subcontinent. Also happened to be one from Thailand, based on one reporter's long investigation, but eyewitness of trading in children. And the Thais came again and said, well, this is a bit off. Can't broadcast this to Thailand. Why not? Well, because it's not very nice. So, well, no, it's not very nice, but you're saying it's not true. No, we're not saying it's not true. Well, OK, you're stuck with it. We're not singling out Thailand in that thing. We're saying this is an example of an issue, not an example of a bad country. This is just an example of an issue. You have to stay with it. So you have to be sensitive in terms of the cultural values that won't let you talk about the Thai monarch. And yet you have to watch against the propensity that you might pull punches to avoid saying things that some people might not find very nice. And that's the sort of delicate path that Radio Australia journalists have to move through every day in dealing with examples that sometimes maybe aren't as clear-cut as that, but which certainly exist when you're trying to balance a cultural sensitivity against our overriding objective, which is to be accurate and comprehensive and impartial.
A common criticism of the Australian media is that relatively little attention is usually given to news from our northern neighbours. This is certainly not the case with Radio Australia, because it's these countries that are the target audience. And it could be argued that for some people, the news service from Radio Australia might be the only source of relatively unbiased news about their own country. Well, unless you live outside Australia or tune into the ABC's Radio National Network late at night, Radio Australia isn't likely to be your everyday listening. You might prefer tuning in to a lively FM commercial station like Fox, an informative news and talk station like the ABC or 3AW, or a public radio station such as 3CCC, where you can take part in making the programs. Whatever your choice, chances are radio is going to play an important part in keeping you informed.